going to talk about somebody else. We're going to talk about Frank. I call Frank Mr. Solo. Frank is not married, and he has no children. He's a former executive, so I think he's probably also pretty independent, and he is living independently. He's 80. He has investments, and he does have an estate plan. He has a sister that he named in his documents to serve as a patient advocate, an agent under his durable power of attorney, and as a trustee. But he did that 10 years ago. This is red flag, red flag, red flag. We'll talk about that later. I'm sure the panelists are going to get to that. His documents are 10 years old. And Frank is now experiencing some behavioral changes. He's missing paying some of his bills. He's had a medical assessment that seems to indicate that he has the beginning of dementia or Alzheimer's, and he may need to relocate to have an appropriate living situation. And one of my favorite things about Frank is that he has Pepper, and Pepper's a dog that has been with him and is an important piece of his life. This situation, to me, cries out perhaps for some input from our professionals down at the end, because while his situation has estate planning and other aspects, really his immediate care needs seem pretty important.
How many of you here have someone who is affected by Alzheimer's or dementia-related illness? Yeah. I'm sorry. It's not an easy diagnosis to hear. It poses a slew of questions. And for those of you that, just a little background on dementia disease. It starts when there's no symptoms, asymptomatic. Brain cells die off 20 years prior to a diagnosis. And when it does surface, it can be viewed as mild cognitive impairment. We're not quite sure what's going on in the brain, but we're going to keep a close eye on it. And for a majority of individuals with a mild cognitive impairment progression, it usually ends up being an Alzheimer's type dementia. There are over 60 types of dementia a person can have. Alzheimer's is only one. And some are very, very aggressive. But for the most part, when we focus on Alzheimer's disease, about 80% of diagnoses turn out to be of that type, and as it is with Frank. So it's important to understand this is a progressive disease. It doesn't go backwards, it goes forward. How fast or how slow the disease progresses is individual. For many of you, you may have had a mother-in-law who had dementia of the Alzheimer's type, and now it's your father. You have an idea of what that journey is like. But each person is individual, just like all of you are in this room. And your journey will be separate and individual as well, if you are a caregiver or a care partner. So you're on that journey of experience and having the best understanding of what's ahead. What do I anticipate? What's it going to look like? So we have 3 stages of the disease, and while we can define them as early, mid to late, or mild, moderate, severe, they're not little boxes that we put people in. They kind of flow through those, and some go very quickly, some journey and plateau and shift into other stages. But being prepared for that, as I mentioned, it's a very costly disease. 11 million Americans are unpaid caregivers. And that money that is needed to provide care may mean that somebody takes a leave of absence or cuts their hours or retires early just so that they can provide that one-on-one care. Not to mention the cost of care in a care community. So planning ahead for this journey financially is just as important as understanding what are my health care needs and how do I prepare for that. A very sad statistic before we move on, 33% of caregivers will pass away before the person with terminal illness because they're not able to take care of themselves, meet their own medical care appointments, get their teeth cleaned. So it affects everyone along this journey. When we think about what we're looking for in functionality, what are those 10 warning signs? I do have a handout there for you from the Alzheimer's Association. You don't have to have all 10 to be aware or be concerned. But when a person is now challenged by performing some of the activities of daily living, like getting dressed, we all know the order, and I see you're all dressed properly. You know, nothing's on the outside that should be on the inside, which is very, very good. But that can be a challenge. And imagine the dignity that gets stripped of the individual when they make a faux pas such as that, knowing that there's an order to life. And we know it so very well, the everyday functions that can be challenging. Remembering somebody's name. There's going to be a test tonight, right? Who did we meet tonight? And are you able to recall them by name? Doesn't mean you have Alzheimer's disease or dementia. But having information shared with you and just not being able to remember it immediately afterwards. And it has nothing to do with, where are my car keys? Where's my cell phone? I'm not talking about that, but do I have children? And the child is sitting right next to you and you say, do I have any children? And the sad part is that she goes, yes, Mom, it's me. Those are the types of forgetfulness that will progress. But when we're looking at the beginnings with Frank, he was losing track of time. He was losing his ability to be responsible, to pay his rent on time, and to know that he has to be accountable for that, because that's missing. So that's a huge concern. And imagine the daughter coming in and having to address that. Is it sister? Sister. When a family member has got to step into somebody else's life.
So Frank is like many of us, right? We put together our emergency action plan, and we have a binder that's this thick, and we're like, whoo, it is done. I'm going to put it in my basement, and I'm never going to look at it again, right? Because it's once and done. I don't need to do anything more. And in that 10-year period, right, Frank has life, and life has changed. His sister has moved away. So 10 years ago, his sister lived in town. Now she doesn't. And Frank never told his sister that he was putting her in as his decision-making surrogate. And in this situation, you know, Frank is moving down the path of Alzheimer's, and it could have been a missed opportunity for him to sit down, think, and say, okay, is my emergency action plan still okay? Are the people that I have in place to implement this plan, A, local, B, do they want to do it, and C, do I still trust them? And part of estate planning is making sure that an individual has the capacity to sign estate planning documents. And I'm not talking about the capacity that Debbie was talking about, like forgetfulness, oh gosh, I forgot where my keys are. We're talking about a legal term of testamentary capacity. Does Frank have the ability to change his documents because he has the legal testamentary capacity to understand and appreciate that he's changing his documents and he's disposing of his assets by way of a certain gift. And in this situation, you know, Frank, you know, just because you have dementia does not mean that you don't have testamentary capacity. So Frank was able to look at his documents and he said, you know, that's okay. These are still okay. I still love my sister. I still trust my sister. The only impediment is that she's far away. So how do we provide a support system for her, right? Who are the boots on the ground to take care of me so that she can make the decisions? And Jamie, how would a care coordinator come into that situation?
So this is a very perfect scenario for a care manager to be involved in. There are a lot of solo seniors who do not have adult children. And in this case, we have a patient advocate, but they're at a distance. So in this situation, a care manager can literally come in and just walk hand in hand with Frank through whatever life is about to throw at him, but also be supporting that patient advocate in her role. So for Frank, you know, when I was actually referred to Frank by the facility, and so when I met with him and his patient advocate, what was most important was developing Frank's trust. For me to be able to be there with him and go to his doctor's appointments with him and arrange things for him so that that patient advocate could return home to take care of her own children, to take care of her own life, you know, in Texas or wherever she's flying back to. So I do go to almost all doctor's appointments with my clients. And it's always surprising to me how difficult the task of filling out all the paperwork when you first get there is for a lot of my elderly clients. And sometimes you have to fill it all out all over again, right? And sometimes it's just minute. But so having that patient advocate to be there next to you to get through the paperwork, but then remember what doctor you just saw, what you just discussed, schedule your follow-ups for you, get you to your follow-ups, get those additional tests done, and be able to communicate what happened to the patient advocate so she understands the health roles that are changing when and if she needs to become the surrogate decision maker is very important. And again, this is where a care manager walking side by side with someone in Frank's situation can make a world of difference. So after we got through some of the appointments, the other thing too is scheduling transportation for seniors. Oftentimes I schedule a transportation that the client and I can go together with so that they are being exposed to safe transportation options, because as Debbie's talking about progression, it's possible that there's going to be a day that Frank can no longer drive himself independently, right? So exposing him to these different transportation options that are going to be safe for him to continue using, even though his health has changed a little bit. So once Frank actually had a dementia diagnosis, then once we've seen the neurologist, now we really need to kind of start looking forward as to what's next. Currently, Frank was living independently, and there were like we'd already mentioned to you, the bills weren't paid, and lots of piles of paperwork and whatnot around the house. So it's the care manager that is there with him, helping him go through this home to downsize. We did a care meeting in which we had a meeting with the patient advocate and Frank and the facility and discussed where would be the best option, the safest option for Frank to live. So the decision was made that Frank was going to move to assisted living because he still has his autonomy. He can still come and go and have so many of the freedoms that he's always had, but his medications are safely administered to him and his meals are prepared for him. So just kind of eliminating some of the trickier parts. But in that became also, we had to downsize out of this independent living space, which means not only sorting through things, but determining what was going to be most appropriate to move with him to his next home, his assisted living home. Is he still able to get off of the couch easily, or is the couch too low for his new health changes? What about the dining chairs? Do we need to maybe bring in dining chairs that have arms? Do we need to bring any durable medical equipment in, like even a simple shower chair, right? So making sure he's moving to a space that's appropriate for him. And then we have continuous oversight by a care manager. So I visit Frank weekly. I'm the boots on the ground, like Kristen said. So I see things as things start to change. And, we've actually noticed some early signs of infection, and we're able to treat it and prevent hospitalizations. If Frank does get hospitalized, which it happens, I'm there at the bedside, helping make discharge plans and sculpt those discharge plans with Frank's preferences in mind, knowing where he's going to do the best in and how we can get him back to his baseline, but also bringing in any additional resources we may need, whether we need to bring in visiting nurse services, skilled services, or home care. Lastly, Pepper. Okay, so we were able to rehome Pepper to another independent living resident, so for one of Frank's former neighbors. But Kristen, isn't there something they could have done in writing about Frank or about Pepper?
There is an amazing thing with animals. Now, I live in a neighborhood and everybody knows my two dogs' name. Do they know my name? I don't think so, but they sure know Cinnamon as she's screaming. She's a Yorkie poo. She yells. My husband's right over there. He'll tell you. And she screams. So they know the dog. And planning for our pets is really, really important. So part of the planning process, right, revisiting, that estate plan that we put in our basement 10 years ago, and when we didn't have Pepper, was potentially making provisions for Pepper, making decisions potentially for the care, carving out money for Pepper, or maybe proactively making a decision as to if I can't take care of Pepper, where should Pepper go? And Jamie, in her care coordination role, is able to help facilitate those dialogues and those discussions and come with a really great solution that's just not, we have to get rid of Pepper. That's devastating. That's absolutely devastating.
I was worried about Frank. After listening to the team, I feel a lot better. I was walking the walk with Jamie as she was doing it, and the kind of thinking through that just happened here for Frank could have happened 10 years earlier, and it would be a lot less stressful. It would be a lot less stressful for Frank to have thought about some of these plans maybe 5 years earlier. So the idea of having an estate plan, not putting it in the drawer, taking a look at it, I tell my clients every year, make it your New Year's resolution. Take a look at it. Every 3 to 5 years, I want to see you back. The financial forecasting piece of it, so important. If I'm going to have to pay for care at a certain level, can I do it? A lot of people don't know the answer to that question. It's really something. I feel better for Frank. Thank you, team. And Pepper.